Welcome to Advanced Certificate in Senior Primary Education, Social Sciences 1-1. This is the exam-based contact sessions for 2020. Your tutor is Mrs. Dinelao Motowanaha. What is all about these question papers? The paper is out of 130 marks. Each question paper will be 3 hours long. It consists of 4 questions, and you are expected to answer all 4 questions. So you are provided with a study guide for social sciences, but this does not limit you to other source of information. For example, the current grade 9 textbook, history textbook, or the yellow previous grade 10's textbook. Now, in Unit 1, this is all about teaching methodologies. Now, this is a daily activities taking place in the classroom. In answering these teaching methodologies questions, it requires you to give general answers, but these general answers should be relevant. So, the following topic should be considered. You should know the meaning of teaching methodologies and teaching methods in history lessons. So what is that? What does it mean by teaching methodologies? And what are the methods a history teacher should use when presenting a history lesson? You should know the values and the characteristics of a history teacher. What are the values? What are the characteristics? What is that someone has to look at to identify a history teacher? And you should also know the role of the history teacher. What is that a history teacher plays in a classroom? You should be able also to know the learning activities that support history class environment. What do I mean by this? What are the activities that would make history conducive environment? Conducive means interesting and teaching and learning environment. And the thing you should also know here, you should know the elements of learner-centered education. I know my students are all learner-centered teachers, and they know very well what a learner-centered education is all about. So you'll be able to score marks on this because it's a daily thing that you do in the classroom. I believe you don't just come present a lesson in a class, then you just talk to the kids, to the learners, but you let them also engage in the classroom. So you should be able to know this elements of a learner-centered education. Now, as a history teacher, you deal with multicultural learners. What is that you have to consider as a history teacher? What is that you have to consider when you are dealing with learners from different backgrounds? Multicultural means from different cultural background. And the other thing you should know, what are the advice to learners? As a history teacher, what is that you would advise learners on the importance of history? There must be something that you know about history. Every teacher gives the good that he knows about his subject. As well here, a history teacher should be giving advice to the learners. What is that you acquire? What is that is important when you are studying history, so that they will be able to take it seriously and they will be able at the end to pass it. And you should also know the importance of exam preparations. You should as well know the importance of pair work in history. So in another way, you should give advantages. You should give the benefits. What is that a learner gets from working with other learners in a pair work? And what is that you would advise your learners to prepare in advance with the examination? Now, the last thing you should know here is about a lesson plan. You should know what a lesson plan is. I believe every teacher, history teacher, uses a lesson plan. You don't just get in a classroom, start presenting without planning your activities. So you should know the basic component of this lesson plan. And the thing that I would like to advise you on this is that most of the students do not know what is that in the lesson plan that you would want learners to achieve at the end of a lesson presentation and at the end of a completion of a chapter. Take note of that. Now, Unit 2, it's on Namibian history. Namibian history, the following topic you should put emphasis on: the contract labor system. What is the contract labor system? You should know that this system was used by colonizers to contract laborers, workers, about a certain period of time. But many people in Namibia have criticized this system. Now, to criticize is when you are not happy with something. So make sure that you know the effects, good effects or bad effects of this contract labor system. And by knowing this effect, you should be able to differentiate the effect this contract labor system had on the workers, the laborers, people who were working on this contract labor system, and at the Namibian nation at large. Windhoek Massacre. What is Windhoek Massacre? For you to be able to give information on this Windhoek Massacre, I would always advise you to put the following into consideration. You ask yourself questions: what? What is Windhoek Massacre? When? When did Windhoek Massacre take place? Why? Why did Windhoek Massacre take place? How? This is the cause. How did the massacre take place? What happened for this massacre to take place? Then the results, the consequences. After now the massacre has taken place, what is that now towards the end of it? What happened? And what happened after this massacre? Was it good or bad? We always have two sides. What is that the Windhoek Massacre? If it was not of Windhoek Massacre, for example, would Sam Nujoma gone outside to seek for political advices? All right. Then we go to the reasons why SWAPO launched an armed struggle. If we are talking of a launch, is the reason we are talking about the reasons why SWAPO decided to come up with an armed struggle. And I always have got two things to tell students, because they get confused between the two: an armed struggle and liberation struggle. You must differentiate between the two. A liberation struggle is any means, either peaceful talkings, either demonstrations, either fighting, whatever, to liberate the people. Now, here we are talking of a specific, which is part of liberation struggle, which is armed struggle. When people have decided to make use of weapons to liberate the Namibian people. You must be able to give these reasons why SWAPO decided to take up this arms to liberate people from colonialism. Now we go to the independent churches. What are the independent churches? What role did independent churches play towards the independence of this country? So, before you go to the role the churches play, you must know the reasons why the independent churches were established. You should be able to describe, to name and explain the reasons why independent churches were established. And towards the role, what independent churches have played, we have a specific role, which is eloque referendum. What is an eloque referendum? You should know how it was, held about, who was responsible for it, and how did it contribute to the independence of Namibia. We come to the United Nations Resolution 435. When was the United Nations Resolution 435 adopted? What are the points of Resolution 435? And when was Resolution 435 implemented? We come to the Ten Hill Constitution. What is Ten Hill Constitution? Before we come to the Constitution, what was the Ten Hill Conference? And there are a lot of reasons here, things we have to look at. Remember, SWAPO did not participate in this conference. Neither United Nations nor OAU have supported this. You should be able to give reasons as to why SWAPO, OAU have not supported this resolution, this constitution or the conference, the Ten Hill Conference. You should also be able to know the fundamental human rights. By looking at these fundamental human rights, we have all the rights in this topic. But if you want to score more marks, you can make use of Namibian Constitution. When they refer you to this article, what do they mean by saying, what do they mean in Article 21? For example, African history, you should be able to know the Pan-Africanism. So how did what is Pan-Africanism? In the first place, we know what is Pan-Africanism. You have to know the contributing figures, the leading figures. The leading figures are the people who have contributed to Pan-Africanism. And how did Pan-Africanism contribute towards the end of colonialism in Africa? You should also know about the OAU. Remember the Pan-Africanism when these leaders called up about Pan-Africanism. At the end, they came up with an organization to eliminate colonialism in Africa, which is OAU. Now you should know the aims of OAU as well as knowing its structure. The structure is the bodies that made up, this OAU. And you should also know the functions of these bodies that made up the structure of the OAU. Plus the successes, know also what OAU has succeeded into and also where OAU has failed. Now, let's come to these two things, economic crisis and economic systems. Economic crisis is the problems. A crisis is an ongoing problem. Because a crisis is something, you will try to solve a problem, but without knowing that you are creating another problem. So we call it a crisis because it's an ongoing. For example, HIV and AIDS. You try to bring about, medicines to cure this, but when you are trying to come up with these medicines, you are actually borrowing money to buy these medicines, which is very much expensive. Now you borrowing money, the country borrowing money, it's causing what? Another problem again in the country. So that's why we say that it's an economic what? Crisis. I have just given you one example. Now, what are the measures to combat? To combat is to overcome this economic crisis. Now, in most cases, students confuse between the economic crisis. Remember, I said economic crisis is a problem, ongoing problems, and economic systems. Economic systems is the way a country's economy is run. For example, through capitalism, through socialism. So I don't want confusions between a crisis. I said crisis is a problem. Economic system is a way how a country's economy is being run. Now you have to know the characteristics of these economic systems and their impacts. Did these economic systems work better for the Africans or did not? Now you should also know the forms of governments. Now make sure that a country has the way how they run their economy and how they run their politics. Now forms of government has to do with politics. And these forms of government, for example, democracy, you should be able to evaluate whether it was good. That's what we talk about, the effect. Either it has good effect or bad effect. Democracy is not the only form of government. There are a lot of forms of governments that African leaders have used, have practiced in their countries. But now you have to find out, were this form of governments good for the Africans? Then we come to the apartheid laws that were introduced for blacks in South Africa. So you should know the apartheid laws that were introduced, for example, Group Area Act, how they were introduced for blacks in South Africa, what effect do they have for blacks in South Africa. Unit 4, it's about the world history. Now in world history, you are expected to know Hitler's aims. What is that Hitler was aiming at? Now this thing has to do with for example, how he broke the terms of the Treaty of Versailles. And these aims of Hitler has contributed also to the outbreak of Second World War. Remember, you must know exactly what Hitler was aiming at that prevented, unit from prevailing in the world, or peace. Then we come to the United Nations. You should know when the United Nations was established, 1945. After 1945, when the war has ended, the leaders of the world has decided they should come up with the international peace organization that will keep peace in the world. So now you should know the aims of the United Nations. By knowing the aims of the United Nations, you should also know the structure, the bodies that made up the structure of the United Nations. What are those bodies? And looking at the structure of the United Nations, you should be able also to know the functions of these bodies. For example, the General Assembly. What is that the General Assembly is aiming at? So that is what we call the functions of these bodies. Okay, we have fascism in Italy. Fascism in Italy, this is Mussolini's fascist party. Mussolini's ideology based on fascism. Remember how it was introduced in Italy after the Second World War and the effect it had on Italians. Now after Mussolini came to power, what were the good things that Mussolini and his government provided to people in Italy? And what were the bad effects of this fascism in Italy? But don't only focus it does not only focus on Italy itself, and also other effects it had on the world. Remember, this Mussolini and Hitler were very good friends. They came up with their ideologies that also prevented peace in the world. Now the last thing you should know here is the International Monetary Fund. The International Monetary Fund, that we call in short IMF, and the World Bank. Those were the agencies of the United Nations So they were exactly formed after the Second World War, because United Nations was established formed in 1945. Now this IMF and the World Bank has got specific functions to do. They were providing money, and this money, it's in forms of loans to disadvantaged world, the developing world, countries that were experiencing problems. So now, they were giving money to these countries in forms of loan, but though they were good, helping these countries solving their economic problems, there were also disadvantages. People have criticized this World Bank for so many reasons, and that is what you would be expected to know in the examinations. What is that IMF and World Bank provided to people? We know it was good, but in as much as they provided loans to countries, there were also some string attached to it that made people in the world criticize this bank. You should be able to give that. This is the end of my presentation. Good luck.